Okay. Welcome everybody to this morning's Audit and Governance Committee. Thanks for attending. Welcome particularly to new members just elected to the committee, as have I been, and hopefully, as we've just been talking about in training, we can make a real difference. Third line of defence stuff we're all here to do, and stuff we enjoy and stuff we're good at. So without any more delay or ramble, moving on to the first item of today's agenda, we have apologies. Do we have any apologies?
We have apologies for Councillor Cuss, thank you.
Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, can I just say I've got to leave at 11:30. I've got an appointment, so apologies if the meeting hasn't finished. I will be departing. Thank you.
Apologies in advance, noted. Thank you. If there are no more apologies, moving on to item number 2 on the agenda then, which is late items to be introduced by the Chair. I don't have any late items to introduce to the meeting today, unless there's anything officers want to introduce at this point. Okay, wonderful, rattling through. Moving on then, item number 3 on the agenda is to look at declarations of interest. This is in addition to the pre-recorded declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Okay, thank you. Moving on then to item number 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of March 2023. I appreciate that not everybody was at that meeting, but we have all had the minutes.
As one of those who was there, I think I probably ought to move them.
Thank you. Anyone willing and able to second that?
I'll second that.
Hall. I assume it's only those who were there who are voting in favour.
Well, I think anyone can vote for it, but
Are we all happy to accept them as an accurate record? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Moving on then, item number 5, the Derby City Council Audit Planning Report. I'm not entirely sure who's delivering this report. Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
The 70, the one about the Alistry Hall, is that happening? Is that because it was put forward to me that I should provide support for internal audit, but I haven't heard anything. Is anything happened on that?
Yeah, we're going to cover it under outstanding resolutions, Philip. It's in there, but it is underway.
And 74, risk management strategy and so on. And it talks about various issues. I imagine training is one of the issues, particularly for members of this committee who are new to the organisation, new to the committee and risk. So I imagine that's something that's going to crop up at some stage. Is that right?
We will be looking at putting a training programme together for all members of the committee, and risk management will be on that.
Any more matters for query on the minutes? Okay, well, I think we've had that, the minutes moved and accepted already, so moving on to item 5, which is the Derby City Council Audit Planning Report, and as I say, I'm not sure who's delivering the report. It would typically be by the chair, I understand, but the previous chair is no longer with us.
sorry, Chair. This one's being delivered by EY.
I'm with you.
Yes.
Thank you. So, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our audit planning report for the 21-22 audit. So I'll just take members through the planning report. Section 1 of the report provides an overview of the strategy and also highlights where there have been a change from the prior year. So I'm speaking to page 5 of the report, Chair. So taking you through the risks which are identified. So the first one, misstatements due to fraud and error. That is a risk which is presumed by international standards and auditing. And we highlight that in terms of that risk, there's no change in from the prior year. Likewise, the second risk there, the second and third risk, the risk of fraud and revenue recognition, and also in terms of risk of fraud and revenue recognition, the third one, the actual areas which are identified where it is outlined that a risk may occur. So these are they're presumed by international standards and auditing, and we highlight there the risks, and there hasn't been any change in our risk assessment from the previous year. The fourth one, moving on, at the top of page 6, the risk relating to valuation of property, plant and equipment, so particularly land and buildings. So they form a large proportion of the council's balance sheet. They are reported using valuation methodologies which are informed by the work of the council's valuation experts, and the risk that those methodologies may or may not be appropriate, and as a result there's a risk of material misstatement in terms of what's recognised on the council's financial statements. Again, no change in the risk focus from the prior year. We outlined there a decrease in risk focus in respect of COVID-19 grants, and then also specifically on the last point there, again in terms of valuation of property, plant and equipment, highlighting that where the valuation methodology is relating to depreciated replacement costs, that's more formulaic in nature. And whilst there's still an risk, there's still an element of judgment. There's a lower risk than with other valuation methodologies. So we've got it there as a higher inherent risk as opposed to the significant risk for other valuation methodologies in respect of land and buildings. Moving on to page 7 of the report, the next risk that's been brought to members' attention relates to infrastructure asset, and this is as a result of issues that have arisen in relation to how infrastructure assets are accounted for. SIPFA has issued a code amendment highlighting it as a risk because moving forward the asset register needs to record information in sufficient detail in order to meet the code requirements as and when the current override ceases to exist. The next risk, valuation of local government pension scheme. Again, it is a large figure within the council's financial statements, and one which is informed by the council's actuary in terms of the estimation of the IS 19 assets or liabilities that are relevant for the particular for the scheme, and as a result, it is identified as a risk area where we engage our internal experts to provide us with a view as to the appropriateness of the disclosures which are made within the financial statements. The last one there highlight the accounting for litigation, and that relates to the position in respect of the disposal of the waste disposal plant at Sinton. Within the executive summary, we also outlined the materiality levels that we're going to be applying for undertaking the audit, and provide details of the team. We also on page 9 outline the scope of our audit, and then on page 10 provide details in relation to our responsibilities under the NAO's Code of Audit Practice for assessing the arrangements that the council has in place for value for money. And assessing those arrangements we look at 3 particular areas: financial sustainability, governance, and the arrangements that the council has in place for improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. Section 2 of the report provides provides more details on the risks that I've just outlined in terms of what the risks are and the procedures that we're going to be undertaking in response to those risks. So I won't go through those in turn, but if the members have any questions, happy to take any questions that members may have. Section 3 of the report again provides more information in our responsibilities on value for money. Again, I won't go through those pages in detail, but happy to take any questions which members may have. And then section 4 again provides more information on our materiality levels. Section 5 provides more information on the scope of the audit, particularly on the looking at your group reporting arrangements and our group scoping elements in terms of the scope of the work that we undertake for the group financial statements. And within section 6, provide more detail on the audit team, including the specialists which we're be looking to engage in terms of undertaking the audit. There were the key elements which I wanted to highlight for members' attention. Happy to take any questions which members may have.
Thanks. Just before we move into questions, the audit timeline towards the end of the report, how confident are we in the dates indicated in this timeline?
So currently the audit team has been undertaking work on the 21-22 audit, but we still have yet to conclude the 2021 audit. There are kind of issues relating to the pensions, pension fund IS 19 reporting, which we're in consultation with management on. And also there's some elements on infrastructure assets where the team has received some responses from management and just gone back with certain queries in relation to those.
Just once again to push for an actual timescale on that.
I think, as is highlighted in the report, we're looking to get the work concluded by the end of October, and that's when we have our team in place in order to undertake the audit. If there's any changes to that timetable, I'll provide an update to management and to the committee. But as I've also highlighted, because of certain issues, we're still yet to conclude on the 2021 audit.
Are there any questions from officers or members?
Number of things. It's obviously disappointing that this report has come to the committee basically over a year later than it should have done. And indeed, it should have been at the last meeting, but obviously, because Hassan's the partner wasn't available to come, we've put it off till this meeting. I think there's one or two issues, basic issues within the report that I have one or two problems with. I think it's about time that you got the name of the committee right, because sometimes it comes up as audit and governance, sometimes audit. That's a minor point, but it does show that you haven't really read the issue, that you haven't really read the document properly before you've issued it. It's quite clearly how up to date is it? Well, it isn't very up to date because it isn't up to date. It's well much later than shown. I have one or two issues about some of the wording. For instance, on materiality misstatements, other misstatements identified will be communicated to the extent that they merit the attention of the Audit and Governance Committee. Do we not merit the attention of any misstatements in the thing? I mean, who decides whether we should know about the misstatements or not? If they are significant misstatements, and I'm not using the word material here, significant misstatements, we should know about them, whatever they are, whatever the size of them, because it's not just a question of a pound here or a pound there. It's the reason for behind the misstatement. So that's one issue. The statutory override on the infrastructure assets. I'm sure a number of perhaps newer members might not appreciate what the issue is here. it doesn't make a deal of difference to the accounts themselves. It doesn't alter the bottom line. It doesn't alter the carry forward balance. It's a question of the measurement of the value of roads and things like that, which is going to be put right by this override by the ministry. Financial years 2021 hasn't been signed off yet, as I understand it. Is that right?
Do you want me to respond to each question
Well,
in turn, or
respond
are you going
to
to go through your list first of all?
Respond to those for now, yeah.
Okay, right. So in terms of the first one was relating to the reporting of differences. So as outlined in the audit report, we'll be reporting any differences over the audit difference level, which is highlighted within the reports. That's half a million, and so that's the level of differences which we'll be reporting. On the second point, in terms of the accounting for infrastructure assets, then as auditors, we audit against the auditing standards. We don't set the financial reporting standards, so the financial reporting standards are set. That's what the council needs to report against, also needs to consider the statutory override. I have sympathy for the comments that's made in terms of the impact on the overall bottom line, but as I said, we're reporting against the standards as they're set. We don't write standards that the authority needs to report against. On the third one, then, as I highlighted earlier on, the 2021 audit has yet to be concluded, and there are matters which I also highlighted earlier which need to be addressed before the 2021 audit can be concluded.
Okay. If we could just touch on pensions. As I understand it, there's been a triennial review of the pensions fund, and that, are you proposing to open up previous year's accounts to adjust the previous year's accounts for the triennial review of the pension fund assets? It being a post-balance sheet event from the point of the... Is that something which you've considered?
So in terms of the pension fund and the impact on the triennial valuation, SIPFA prepared on a briefing note for practitioners which highlighted the issue. The council responding to that briefing note. There is a point where we need to consider whether at the time of signing the audit, is there any more up-to-date information which may have an impact on the prior audits. It is a issue in terms of timing. I acknowledge that if the audit had been concluded, then that particular position wouldn't need to be considered, but in common with a number of other local government entities, the position on the triennial valuation report as outlined within SIPFA's bulletin does need to be considered in respect of prior years.
So the answer to the question is not yes and it's not no, it's I'm thinking about it, is that right?
It depends on the scale of the issue. In terms of any prior period adjustments, then you'll be looking to make a prior period adjustment if it's material. I think management might be able to provide more information in terms of what the possible impact is for the council in respect of the triennial valuation and the impact on prior year figures.
And that's going to affect 2021, 21-2 and subsequent years, is that right?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, as Sam's pointed out, SIPFA have issued a bulletin to do with the triennial review that we've got and we are reviewing. We've received additional pension figures from the county, and I'm going through the process of working through the implications of those. So they may well be in some impact on prior years, but that's still being assessed at this point.
Thanks. Councillor Kerr, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was hoping to come back to the timeline, and clearly we are where we are at the moment, but in terms of the information that's just been alluded to about the pensions and about the valuations, is there anything that, do you feel that your job is being held up by lack of information, unreasonably held up by lack of information from the council? Or are there any other bodies which you're being held up in terms of action?
The answer to is our job being held up because of lack of information from the council? The answer is no. So that's not an issue in terms of the procedures that Peter just outlined that's being undertaken in respect of the IS19 valuation and information from the actuary and the administrators of the fund. I kind of acknowledge that does take time. Management will be able to provide you with more fuller outline details on the kind of procedures that they're undertaking and what they need to do in terms of information requests. There are a number of other authorities which are in the same position as the council in terms of assessing the impact of the triennial valuation on prior years.
Okay, so through you, Chair, to sort of summarise, you feel it's going okay, there's still information that you're waiting for, but the time frame is reasonable?
I think in terms of the pensions issue, it can be a complicated point, so it's not necessarily a straightforward task in terms of providing that information. It's not a case that management are deliberately withholding information for us to negatively impact on the progress of the audit.
Can you give a deadline by which you would hope that information would be available, prevented holding you up?
I think we're in the. I think management will probably be in a better position to say, in terms of the procedures that they're undertaking, how long that's going to take before they can provide that information, because we are dependent on receiving that information before we can audit it. But I recognise that it's not necessarily an easy task that they're having to do in terms of gaining hold of the information they need to do to assess what the impact on the financial statements.
Give some assurance.
Yeah, so yeah, just to give members some assurance, yeah, I'm working through the implications of that sit for paper at the moment. As I said, we've got the new IES19 figures from the county, and I'm just working through that, and I would hope to conclude on that this week about what we need to do.
Chair, that sounds helpful all round.
Thanks. Councillor Mahal.
Yes, cheers, Chair. Just a couple of observations from myself on the report. I'm not sure whether these are just general thoughts, whether they could be recommendations, but obviously it's quite extensive, but I think it's in the first section where it's got the risks. Obviously, a lot of them there's no change. I think there's only one where there's a decrease, and then I think in section 2 it talks around what the risk is and then what we will do. So I suppose my question is, because these are essentially risk mitigations as far as I'm aware. So are these risk mitigations not working? Is that why there's no change in the risk? Or, what's the risk burn down? Like, when do we expect these to start to go green from the yellow that they currently are? Because it'd be quite interesting to understand which of the mitigations per risk have the biggest impact, because there'll be some that have bigger impacts than others. And it'll just be interesting to know which of the mitigations have been completed, or which ones haven't yet, which ones will have sort of the biggest bang for their buck, so to speak.
Thank you.
The risks which are highlighted in the report, they're audit risks, so they're risks that we identify in respect of our audit. So what we deem to be a significant risk is a significant risk of material misstatement within the financial statements. So they're not risks in terms of operational, delivery of services for the council. They're risks about what's in the financial statements and whether or not there's a risk of as I said, of a material misstatement, where we outline areas of inherent risk. Again, that's where the issue may, the reported element within the financial statements, is there an inherent risk due to the nature of that transaction, that there may be a risk of misstatement. And in terms of another risk, then it's not necessarily a material risk, but it's an area of focus which where there may be some degree of estimation judgment where we're focusing our procedures in. So the work that is proposed to be undertaken, it's work which we'll be undertaking as external auditors, not work which the council is undertaking to mitigate the risks. I think it's important to recognise the difference between an audit risk and an operational risk, which you may be more familiar with from your risk management processes.
Thanks. I wonder if officers could just explain to us the process on receipt of notification of those potential risks. Do we just note them? Or?
A question for me, Chair.
If you can answer the question,
it's as I said, they're audit risks, so they're risks which we identify for the risk of misstatements. And when we're highlighting it, they're risks that we're communicating to yourselves in terms of where there may or may not be misstatements within your financial statements. So we're saying this is an area where there may be a misstatement in the financial statement, a misstatement within the financial statements. This is the reason why, and these are the procedures that we're going to do to gain assurance on the figures which are reported and whether or not those figures are true and fair. So in terms of the IS 19 disclosure, using that as an example, so we'll be highlighting that as a risk because it's an area of estimation. It's an area where you're dependent on the work of an external expert, i.e. the pension fund's actuary. We're highlighting that as an audit risk, but management would have processes in place which they might want to provide more details on in terms of ensuring that they've engaged, the pension fund ensuring that it's engaged a professionally competent actuary. There'll be processes in place for the information that's provided to the actuary to undertake their actuarial valuation. There'll be processes in place for checking the reports of the actuary when it's first drafted. So they're kind of procedures which management would have in place in terms of undertaking checks and balances before reporting on the figure that's within the financial statements. But even with those checks and balances that management may have in place, there'll still be an audit risk in terms of what's in terms of the risk of misstatement for the financial statements.
Accept that, yeah. Thanks for your response. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just build on Councillor Kerr's question? In relation to the assurances that you've had in terms of access to the information around the pension actuarial issue, is there not a chance now to expedite that timeline, particularly in relation to 2021 accounts, to get the work completed well before October? Because I imagine a lot of the work has already been done, and you're just awaiting for the information on those two outstanding questions. Is that correct?
That's right. So there's some areas we're waiting for information on. The October timeline is the timeline for completing the 21-22 audit, and we highlight within the report that it's subject to completing the 2021. Naturally, when we get we'll be looking to conclude the 2021 audit in advance of the October deadline. So when we get the information, looking to assess that information and then completing the procedures that are outstanding for the 2021 audit.
Thanks. Clearly would appreciate any efforts to expedite, especially in light of the cooperation and timescales by officers. Are there any more questions in response to that report? Mr. Sutherland?
Just a couple of other things. Just for my information, I'm not sure what it is. On page 37, you talk about a UK pie audit client. I'm not quite sure what pie audit client is, just for my information. And right tucked at the end is the question of fees, which wasn't altered. And the comment is put down there, the council does not agree with the increase. What's the position on fees at this point in time? Are we still not agreeing to any increase in fees? Alison, perhaps that's a question to Alison, really. Or?
Yeah, so the query we'd raised about the rebasing, I think, is we were querying the level of that rebasing fee. And I think our position's still the same on that we query the level of that rebasing. But having said that, I do understand EY's point of view from that perspective.
Is it currently with the PSAA for mitigation? Sorry, if that's not who you're aware, yeah, but if there's a dispute on fees, something called the PSAA can then rule on whether it's legitimate or not.
Yeah, that's what we've done in the past. We've sort of lodged it with PSAA, and they make a judgment as to whether the level of fee is appropriate or not.
Can I just ask, what's the process there for escalating our disagreement with the PSAA?
Well, it's lodging an appeal with PSAA. They're the organisation, I think, as Alison alluded to at the briefing earlier, they're the organisation that appoints external auditors for local authorities that we've signed up for. So it would be a case of referring that fee to them for their judgment on it, which is what we've done in the past.
Okay, thanks. And there's an opportunity to do so in advance of the fees being set and paid, or is that a retrospective symbol of disagreement?
It's retrospective because the fee there's a core fee set for the work undertaken. EY obviously then assess that and decide what extra work there needs to be done to give assurance, and then there's a debate as to whether we believe that fee is correct or not. And if there's no agreement between the two parties, then obviously we can refer that then to PSAA for their judgment on it. And as I say, that's what we've done in the past.
Okay, thanks. So the current position is that has been expressed and it's being considered by PSAA.
I don't think we've lodged it as yet. We've done it in the past, but we would need to lodge an appeal if we don't feel that fee is correct. But it's not been done at this point in time.
All right, and the process is in flight. Nothing needs to be resolved now.
No.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Just on the fee position. So as Peter said, the PSA set a scale fee. For any scale fee variations, they need to be approved by the PSA. On concluding the audit, then we submit a scale fee variation to the PSA. We highlight within the scale fee variation whether or not elements are agreed or disagreed by management, so that needs to be stated. And even if the scale fees are agreed by management, the PSA still, under the framework, they still are the ones who determine the fees, so they'll come to a determination. And if it's disagreed with, you know, they'll look at the reasons from our point of view, any position, any kind of information which management supplies, and then make a determination. So it will be on the conclusion of the audit that the scale fee variation is submitted.
Thanks for that clarity. Are there any more questions on the back of the report from officers or colleagues? Did you hear the question?
I did. We won't be starting our planning procedures for 22-23 until the 21-22 audit's completed, so it won't be until the new year.
Is that the final year? Sorry, there's been some new auditors appointed, external auditors appointed for a subsequent year. I can't just remember which year it is. That was my point there.
Yeah, I believe that's the answer. Yeah, is that clear? Any more questions on that report, or shall we move on? Thank you. Moving on then to item number 6 on the agenda. It's the Audit and Governance Committee outstanding resolutions, which we all have a copy of. Would anybody like to take us through the outstanding resolutions? Please.
I'll do that, Chair. As you can see, there are 3 outstanding resolutions on page 3. The first one around the appointment of independent persons to the Audit and Governance Committee. As you can see there, the deadline for applications was the 5th of June. We've received a number of applications. Myself, Alex Hoff, who's responsible officer for this, and Dominic have gone through them, had a look at them, and the next step will be to talk to those that we're going to consider to put in good applications. What we want to try and do is to look at how these IPs are going to complement the existing members that we've got on here and their skills, plus the other IPs that are in there. What we don't want is IPs with all the same background, because that won't actually add much to the committee. It will in certain areas, but we want more breadth on that. So that's the next step, and we're also going to involve Alison as Section 151 officer in our talk to these people as well. I'm going to skip the Alstry Hall for the time being and just move on to the final one on the internal audit progress report. It was decided at the last committee that committee wanted to call in 3 areas of audit. We normally bring these as part of an internal audit progress report. We haven't got an internal audit progress report coming to this committee. We also felt that given the number of new members on the committee, would give them a bit of a chance to get into the feel of Audit and Governance Committee, and also give me time to brief them on what the issues are and what the previous committee felt about these. And so therefore we've decided to knock that back to the July meeting. So we'll have a progress report coming to the July meeting, and these 3, we will invite the relevant officers in to come and provide further assurance on how they're dealing with the recommendations, audit recommendations in these areas. Going back now to the Alstry Hall one, the new members, just to give you some background on this, it was raised at the council meeting in January, and Councillor Baggy Shankar referred the Alstry Hall issues through to Audit and Governance Committee to consider. It was considered at the March meeting and decided that they would ask Central Midlands Audit Partnership to do an investigation into certain areas that have been raised. Councillor Baggy Shankar came along to that meeting and raised a number of issues. So myself and Martin Shipley, I'm going to get to chat in a minute about where we're at with the investigation, met with the former chair of this committee, Joanna West, and we invited Councillor Baggy Shankar along as well. Unfortunately, Baggy couldn't make it to that meeting. But we came up with a scope, and Martin and the team are now working on that. So I'm going to hand over to Martin just to brief, and it'll also help Philip as well from his previous questions to see where Philip will be joining us to help out. I'll hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Richard. There were 2 resolutions at the last committee with respect to this. Firstly, that a meeting will be held to scope the internal audit investigation, which Richard's just explained took place on the 12th of April. I'll expand on what we are covering, part of the objectives and scope of that audit in a moment. And secondly, that Philip as a co-opted member would provide support to internal audit for this investigation. It's intended that once field work sufficiently progressed, we will involve Philip to provide support in order to obviously review the field work and help us, assist us with working up the conclusions on the investigation. With respect to the scope, which was agreed at the aforementioned meeting, we were requested to investigate and report back to the committee in due course on the following matters. That the Council's engagement with English Heritage assessment for the golf course to become a heritage asset and the completion of the heritage asset impact assessment followed due process was the first objective, which obviously there's two facets to that there. Secondly, whether the removal of damage to trees at Alistry Park constituted a criminal offence, and if so, what action has been taken and or should be taken to redress this. And the third objective was a competitive process carried out for the sale of Alistry Hall and Golf Course, and was adequate due diligence undertaken to ensure that the process involved value for money outcome for the council. Following that meeting, we allocated the work through the auditors. We got people working on it. We're focusing presently on identifying the key facts pertaining to these matters to identify basically the balance of evidence to provide an assessment over the governance arrangements in place. We've presently retrieved, or in the process of retrieving and examining the relevant documentation pertaining to these matters. The auditor, main auditor involved on it, other than myself, has been interviewing officers and interested parties required to establish the facts, and we're currently securing necessary evidence to support findings. We are just about getting to a point now where we're pulling that all together, and we're currently looking to write it up and to identify and evaluate where we are. So as previously stated, probably within the next couple of weeks, we should be in a position where we can contact Philip to provide that additional support in review of the field work, and so we can obviously arrive at subsequent conclusions on this matter. And we are presently hoping that we should be able to feed back at the next committee at the end of July, as long as all things go well. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
I wonder, in terms of the field work and asking questions, has that included members of the campaign group who have been seeking to reinstate I can't remember the name of the person, but to reinstate a golf course? Because they had done quite a lot of work.
We have had a lot of information and evidence, and there has been communication from that individual, and he sent through lots of documents and stuff through us that we've actually fed into this. At the moment, we want to evaluate the facts and all of the information which is there before speaking to them with respect to that. And then there's other people potentially on the committee that we also need to speak to first before doing that. But before doing so, we want to be in possession of all of the information available. So we are coming from a position of authority and a position of knowledge on where, what, when, how, rather than just speaking to people to get hearsay at this stage. Anything which is evidential, we're currently working through. And as far as we're aware, presently has been provided.
Okay, so you've asked them for information, they provided you information, but you haven't yet had an exchange of questions.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr Shibley, I have likewise been contacted by, I suspect, the same member of the public interested party. Would you suggest, if members do receive communications, that they ought to be forwarded to you?
To myself and Richard, yes, please. Yes, so we can tie them into the process. If we probably want 5-10 minute catch up at the end, we can do to sort of identify where we are with that. That's okay with yourself, yeah.
Are there any other questions specifically in reference to Alistry Hall?
Information. I mean, I think the reference to the committee was from Councillor Shankat and Councillor Barker, I think. So it was a cross-party thing, issues. It wasn't a party political thing. It was felt certain allegations have been made about what X has done or what Y has done, whether X party or Y party has done. So that was why my involvement was come to get involvement, an independent review of the thing, just have a look to ensure that as far as they could do, I wasn't signing it off. It's not my job to sign it off, just reviewing how they've gone about it and what they've done. That was just for information, really, yeah.
Thanks for the information, and I agree that independence is a vital, crucial role in all of these matters. Okay, are there any other questions regarding the wider issue of outstanding resolutions? Okay. So that on the agenda then, that was for noting, wasn't it? Moving along then to item 7 on the agenda, which is the draft work programme for 2023-24. Would you like to present on the matter?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, this is, each year we produce a draft programme. We can always call it a draft programme of work because it is liable to change as things go on. And what we do is we try and schedule out in here what we would expect the officers to be bringing to each meeting of the committee. So as you can see there, today's is pretty much up to date. So everything that we've got down as primary activities is on the agenda. And then we've gone forward then for the 26th of July and further meetings just to say these are the type of things. Things will be added in. What I will draw your attention to, of course, is page 5, where we've got other activities not scheduled as yet. And we have quite a list there, which we've had at previous work programmes, unfortunately, which is really, I think, but it raised the question with the external auditor of, when are we expecting to see some of these things like he was mentioning in the 22-23 plan. So we've got a lot of items down here that we don't know quite when these are going to come. We know roughly when external audit are planning to bring their audit to a conclusion, but we've known from the past couple of years that things are knocking on. So at the moment we haven't scheduled these. But what we tend to do is we keep the work programme. It's a very fluid document, and it will come back to various committees over the next few months, and you'll see changes to the way things go. But what we try to do is just really give you some sort of flavour of what you can expect from in the next few meetings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Quinn, you have a question?
One of the other things that's happening in the council at the moment is the review of our own governance arrangements and our constitution and standing orders. I'm not seeing this on here. Is it something that we should be considering?
Given that this committee is the one delegated with responsibility for governance, then it is something you ought to be made aware of, yes.
In that case, Chair, I think that may be coming as soon as having a first look at it in July, because it's just setting up. There's apparently a draft now available, or nearly available.
July achievable?
I'm not involved in this, Chair, but I will speak with the relevant people to see what they want to do with this. Just check with Dom. Is that something we should be doing, Dom?
I'll speak to Alex about it and see when he can bring something on there. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you. Moving on then to item 8 on the agenda, which is the annual report. And I think, is this perhaps the item on the agenda which ought to have been presented by this previous chair?
I'd like to present on the matter, Chair, yeah. One of the things that good practice has always recommended is that the Audit and Governance Committee does an annual report each year and reports through to full council. Before former chair left, Councillor Joanna West and myself met and put together this report. Joanna has signed this off back in late April, early May, and really it comes through to this committee for the committee to have a look at. Usually what would happen is have slightly more members than just Councillor Kerr and Philip Sunderland that have been here before, and really ask the members, does this report cover everything that they think happened in the meetings in 2022-23 of the work of the Audit and Governance Committee, and are they happy that it goes forward to full council as a report of their activity for that year?
So, members, everybody's had a chance to see the report, and granted that Councillor Kerr and Mr Sutherland are the only members of this group who've had an opportunity to experience the contents of the report. Are we equally happy, having not experienced it, to accept that and pass it through to Council? Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I mean, obviously happy it goes forward because it's been produced. My only query is that, having read through it, it just seems to be a regurgitation of everything the committee's done during the year, which is also included in the reports and minutes of the meetings. So unless it's, unless it's a requirement or it adds value to the actual work of the council, work of the council, I don't see. It seems to me unnecessary bureaucracy and additional work for people who I expect have already got a lot of work on their plate. And that would be my question. Do we need to produce one in the further, or is it just a nice to have that we could dispense with because all the information is available elsewhere?
And I can't dispute that is the case, but it's one thing now that good practices that audit committees generally do produce a report so the full council can see the work they're doing. I mean, it may well be sat in minutes and stuff, but it's whether other members of the council that don't sit on the committee actually do read those minutes and do pay an interest in what goes on in audit and governance committee. But it does, what it does do is highlight the importance of the audit and governance committee. There are things in there, yes, I mean, it is always going to reflect the minutes because it is looking at the work of the committee. But there are, it is as it's seen as good practice. It's not something that I would want to stop doing, and it's something I think may well a lot of local authorities now are looking at audit committees producing these reports. So it is something it may well at some stage be made mandatory. I personally don't think it will, but we want to be demonstrating the value of this committee, and this I feel does do that.
As a busy man myself, I appreciate the concern that you've raised, and I think it's not entirely without merit. I just wonder if there's a compromised position where a report can be produced in a summary format that's easily absorbed. It's a lot to take in its current form for busy members of accounts.
Yeah, just one point. I agree with the good practice, and if there are elements of good practice we ought to follow, as long as we made a conscious decision that it's applicable to us. But the point about not reading the minutes, what's the guarantee people are not going to read this as well? I don't think it's a bit of a moot point, that one.
Mr. Sutherland?
Just a bit of background, perhaps. I mean, one of the reasons, not only for good practice to produce such a report, but some years ago, 5+ years ago, there were, well, I put it, significant governance issues within the City Council's arrangements. And the then external auditor expressed considerable concern about the way in which the City Council operated and the decision-making processes. As a result of that, the Audit Committee, as was then reinforced and added to Game Audit and Accounts and then Audit and Governance. The governance issue is an issue which is critical for any organisation. And to demonstrate that they have got proper governance arrangements, this is one of the reasons for producing this report. It's all right, very well for people in this committee to see it, because yes, we all know what is in it. It produced for the council. You can then demonstrate to everybody that you have covered the governance issues and the sort of issues which arose in the past, which were significant enough to require what I would call a statutory report from the external auditor, the then external auditor, not EY, it was the previous one. This was in response to that, so it demonstrated that the arrangements within the council had changed significantly, and they have changed significantly. I mean, Councillor Bolton was chatting to me earlier on, was remarking on how things had changed a lot since she was last on the council, and I think that it's changed for the better, because it demonstrates not only are the decisions made, but decisions are being made in the proper way, and I think this is one of the tools to demonstrate the way in which the governance issues has been tackled and how continues to be tackled and addressed. So that's just my personal view.
Thank you. Are there any more views, Councillor Kerr?
I would also like to just endorse its existence, because I think for members who weren't on the committee, it gives a summary without having to read through all the background papers or watch recordings of the meetings as to what has happened in the previous year. And that is available not just for people within Derby who might wish to look at it, but also people from other local authorities who are wanting to maybe improve their practice and to see whether Derby has got good practice and whether there's anything to learn from us. So I think there is a real value in having a document. I don't, in all honesty, expect every member of the council to read it, but it gives them the opportunity of reading it, and it might inspire other people to feel that, yes, this is something they would like to get involved in, and there might be more competition for places next year.
Thank you for your view. I know you have a question. I just want to quickly mention that the matter at hand is to discuss whether or not to present this report to the council. If members feel that they would like to debate the existence or requirement of a report in general, I think that can be brought onto a future agenda. Did you have a question?
Just wanted to add what Lucy said, really, and just thank you for, you know, the consideration, the impact on officer time, because that's really, really valued. So thank you for that. But I think it also provides an opportunity for the audit committee, not just to share the work that they've done, but also an escalation route if there are areas where the committee felt that either office there was, you know, issues around engagement or conflict or anything like that. I think the report provides that escalation to full council as well. So I think it adds value in that area.
Thanks. Okay, so the matter at hand then is to consider whether to present this report to council as it is. Does anybody have any thoughts or proposals? Agree. Does that need to be proposed, seconded, that formal?
Members happy with the recommendation.
I think are members happy with the recommendation? Looks like a yes to me. The secondary matter then, to discuss whether a report is something we want to do on an ongoing basis. Do we want to bring that back to committee?
I'd be quite happy with your proposal, Chair, that there's a lot of information that is just available as background information. If we cut to the chase in terms of what the overall view of the committee was and what its recommendations moving forward, so really succinct document, I think it would address all of the issues that have been raised, including encouraging people to read it because it's 2 pages rather than 20 pages or whatever it is.
For what it's worth then, again, I appreciate the concern, but I'm having worked in governance for a long time, I believe that being the invisible third line of defence is probably an uncomfortable position, and I would rather publish something. So perhaps we can work together to publish something attractive to be reviewed towards the end of the year. Any more questions or comments on that matter? Thank you. Moving on to item number 9 then on this agenda, it's the Internal Audit Annual Report for 22-23 and Head of Internal Audit Opinion. Are you speaking on this matter?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, this report, again, it's looking back at what I've presented to committee over the meetings, through the progress, internal audit progress reports in 22-23. It pulls all that together. One of my key tasks as a head of audit is that I have to, under the public sector internal audit standards, produce an annual opinion each year. And all the audit work that we do over the year feeds into that annual opinion. And this report has to be, my opinion has to be part of an annual report, so i.e. reporting why, basically showing how I've arrived at this opinion. So all the audits we do support my overall opinion. And as you can see from the covering report, I've got an overall opinion of a satisfactory system of governance, risk and internal control in paragraph 4.10. So the whole of the annual report supports all of this. There are items in there that the committee won't have seen everything of because how the committee meetings are scheduled. The March meeting, for example, all the stuff we'd reported was up to the end of February, so there was still audit work going on in March that has fed into this as well. But overall, we've done, in my opinion, we've done a number of the number of audits we have achieved will support my opinion. I mean, there are occasions if we don't feel we've done enough work, then I need to state to this committee that I don't feel that there was enough work done to enable me to make an opinion. However, in 22-23, there was plenty of work done, not just in the audit work as well. I also look at other factors that are happening in the, through meetings and stuff like that. I can build up my own assurance that things are happening, which I can will then support my opinion. Also, other types of audit work that we do around fraud and investigations, they give me an insight into why things have happened like that. Any consultancy work we do as well, that all feeds. So everything really that we do within the audit sphere feeds into this opinion. You'll see there that we've, I've said there were 37 substantial and reasonable ratings on audits. However, we did have 7 limited. 4 of those were schools audits, so I tend to park those to one side. And we had 1 where we had no assurance at all that we could give on that, and that was around, as you see in the main annual report, around catering. This is an area that we've been doing an investigation into, and it's something we've been reporting through to Audit and Governance Committee for the last couple of years, and we've done follow-up audits in areas around this, but we looked at stock control, and the overall opinion on that particular audit was that the stock control was non-existent. So there's no way we could give any assurance on that. The annual report itself really takes everyone through the type of audits we've done, broken down, looking at the recommendations. One of the problems we've had as an audit section, and it has an Audit and Governance Committee have picked up on this, and we've had, as I said, we had the support of the previous chair as well, and the Section 151 officer, is around areas where we do make recommendations. People come back and say they will implement them, but then we have to follow all these up, and we find that recommendations aren't being implemented to target dates and that type of stuff. This is brought through to committee, and committee then will call in officers to ask on certain things why recommendations haven't been implemented. What's the reason about that? One thing we are finding at the moment is more people are trying to risk accept recommendations that they previously were going to implement. This is something else that I've been bringing through to committee for committees. Really, the committee are happy to accept the proposals put forward. In a lot of cases, if they're low risk recommendations, I'm slightly more comfortable with that. But if we're talking of moderate or significant risk recommendations, then I really want to highlight to committee that they're areas that we need to look at more closely. The thing is, what I'm trying to get across to officers is why accept a recommendation at the outset and say you're going to implement it and then change your mind halfway through. There's got to be a reason. If it's been superseded and there's reasons why, that's fair enough. But if it's just because you can't be, I won't use the word can't be bothered, but if they're feeling that that they can no longer implement that recommendation, then they need to put forward good reasoning as to why, and bring it to this committee for this committee to decide whether they are happy to accept that. And that's the type of things that is happening more of. I won't go too much into the annual report itself because it's reiterating what comes through in progress reports. But again, it's something I have to do under the public sector internal audit standards. It's not something we can say, oh no, we don't need to bother with that. It is a requirement for the PSIS that I do this. I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Anybody have any questions? For what it's worth, I completely agree with your stance on risk acceptances. Lack of resource or lack of desire is a completely unacceptable reason to accept a risk. The risk needs to be managed and mitigated. If there are no more questions, we can move on to item number 10 on the agenda, which is a review of the effectiveness of internal audit. Who else would like to speak on it? Oh, you would like to speak on the matter, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as Richard has just done an assessment of the council in terms of his opinion, this is my assessment of our internal audit, as contained in the report. So, this stemmed really from an annual self-assessment that was carried out in February 2020, where there's a question asked of the committee around the adequacy of the internal audit in terms of its staffing and resource, and that opinion was passed to the Section 151 officer at the time to form a view, and this report contains that view. In terms of the background, the Section 151 of the Local Government Act sets out the mandatory requirement for an internal audit function, and that that relevant authority must undertake effective internal audit to evaluate the effectiveness of its risk management. In terms of the report, the opinion of the Section 151 officer is based on the following key areas, and that's around the structure and resourcing level of the internal audit function, the extent of the conformance within the PSIS and the producing the quality of work, the delivery of the audit work, the overall performance of the audit team, audit committee reporting and the implementation of audit recommendations. And I'll just give a quick summary of the assessment of those areas. So in terms of the structure and staffing of the internal audit, it was noted that the team had a minor restructuring in April 2021 to increase the capacity at the operational level, and that led to a reduction in the management tier of one post. The audit work is undertaken by experienced and qualified staff, and you can see in 4.9 of the report the qualifications of the internal audit team. And one key area that CMAP is addressing is its succession planning at its leadership level, and it gives details within the report about managing that success and the involvement of 2 trainee auditors that have been taken on and are doing their first year of the level 7 internal audit apprenticeship. So in terms of the opinion of the structure and staffing of the internal audit, there's confidence within the professional field of the internal audit and also the capacity within that team. All the professionals, qualified staff within the CMAP undertake mandatory continuing professional development within their respective institutes. In terms of the resourcing of the audit plan, the audit work is actively managed within the resource available, and regular conversations are had with myself and the head of audit around the focus of that audit work in terms of the risk. There's been occasions when the completion of the internal audit assignments is not as timely as we would have envisaged, but we're aware that with the backlog of this, the committee and the former audit and chair of the governance wrote to the service directors and the heads of service to express that they had full engagement in that audit process, and that can be demonstrated also by the fact that the Chief Executive was called to audit committee last audit committee to be able to provide that assurance too. In terms of compliance with professional standards, from the 1st of April 2013, the public sector internal audit standards became effective, and that really was the objective of that was to define the nature of the internal auditing and public sector and to set the principles for carrying out the internal audit and a framework around that internal audit provision. And CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountancy, have also provided a local government application note to support that. There's been a number of areas of good practice identified within that review, which are highlighted in 4.20 of the report. And a summary of that is that the internal audit charter set out the roles and responsibilities. The service has developed and documented an internal audit methodology. There's consistent supervisory processes and a robust assurance report. There's routine reporting that informs the clients of the council and also the audit committee, and a self-assessment identifies area for future development. In terms of planning the internal audit work, I can see that the internal audit plans are more now clearly aligned to the topics that are most important for the success of the council, and there exists the ability for internal audit to respond to the emerging risks and issues and the changing priorities of that council, and that's demonstrated by the quarterly audit planning that's been adopted by the internal audit section. In terms of improvements and service development, CMAP have developed and maintained a quality assurance and improvement programme that covers all aspects of the internal audit activity. And that programme also assesses the efficiency and effectiveness of the internal audit activity and identifies opportunities for improvement. The quality of reporting, audit reports are shared with relevant managers. The quality of the internal audit reports are discussed regularly, and I'm quite happy with the progress that's been made in terms of the quality of those reports. In terms of implementation of internal audit recommendations, there is a process for the monitoring and implementation of those recommendations, and that's reported periodically to service directors and strategic directors. The head of internal audit is also been invited to the strategic leadership team, which involves the chief execs, the strategic directors and the service directors to report on the timeliness of audit recommendations. So there has been a recent escalation in terms of senior management transparency in that area. In terms of service delivery and KPIs, the partnership board monitors the overall performance of the partnership, and you can see from the report that there have been good performance in the areas that have been monitored in terms of service delivery, plan completion, productive days and customer satisfaction. And you can see in the report at 4.35 that in terms of the customer satisfaction surveys, 73.9% were rated as excellent, with 21.7% as good and only 4% as fair. So in terms of my overall opinion, in terms of the effectiveness of the internal audit, my overall conclusion is that CMAC continues to deliver an effective internal audit service to the council, and you can see my recommendations in the report at 2.1. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Are staffing levels similar to those of other size councils, the internal audit team?
Can I ask Richard to comment on that?
It varies. The thing is, being a partnership, we've got 6 organisations that we're having to cover. It's a lot depends really on the nature of each organisation and what it wants as for an audit. So what we need to do is make sure. I mean, there is a minimum level of internal audit that external audit will comment on. Now, we had this several years ago, 2015-16. The EY commented that they didn't think the level of internal audit that the council was purchasing was sufficient. They couldn't answer the question, so what is a sufficient level? They avoided answering that question and just basically said, well, we don't, from our opinion, it is not enough. You'll find it's really horses for courses when it comes. I mean, some organisations that we audit, there are a lot more audit. And we've got 3 district councils that we audit as well as the city council. And they all receive different levels of audit because it's the type of level of assurance that they want. So if they want more assurance, we do have to do more audits, and so that's what guides. And we do compare, but I mean, and these days there are a lot more audit partnerships out there, and some of them, like the South West Audit Partnership, are huge. So they will have tens to hundreds of auditors covering a vast swathe of the southwest of the country, so including county council. So it's difficult to do that and to sort of really compare and contrast, we say.
I think in terms of my assurance to the committee, all the areas that are identified as significant risk within the council, we have audits within that, and we also have had the capacity to be able to respond to things like the Alistry Hall. So we're not in a situation where we feel that we don't have coverage in all the high risk areas, or we can't respond in a consultancy way to some of the requests that come ad hoc to the internal audit section.
Does that satisfy your question? Are there any other questions?
Yes, just a small matter really concerns me is as Alison's identified in the report, the question of succession planning and qualifications, because quite clearly people need to be qualified to demonstrate that they are doing works to the standard required by their professional institute. But succession planning is something that tends to get forgotten sometimes, and you know, nobody's going to be here forever, but but it is an issue that needs to be addressed at some stage in the not too distant future. That just was my personal view.
that something that's on the horizon scan?
It is. I mean, we've got a succession plan in place. We've got trying to grow our own, but we're also looking at. We've got a position where, with the senior management at CMAP, myself and the 2 audit managers, we've all done a number of years in local government. Anyway, I've done 38. One's done 39. The other one's done 40. So we're all at that stage now where we're getting to the end of our careers. And so we're looking at the next level to bring those through. So the group auditors, bringing those through to then be the leaders for CMAP in the future, and looking then at principal auditors and senior auditors and seeing which of those can move and step up to the next level. So it's all in hand. And it's just making sure now that we've got those people coming through.
Thank you. Assuming that plan also caters for key people risks within your team.
It does, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions for comments? Thank you. In that case, we shall move on to item number 11, which is the Internal Audit Plan 23-24 for Quarter 2.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, we're now actually into the correct year for the first time. As we've outlined a couple of times through the reports, one of the things we always used to do an annual internal audit plan based on what we're going to do over the next year. The pandemic showed one thing that risks can change quite dramatically. At that point, we decided it makes sense to not plan on an annual basis, but to plan on a quarterly basis. Therefore, we can be more reactive to changes in risk and anything else that's happening within the authority. So we now plan on a quarterly basis, but what we do is it's a rolling 12-month plan. So the plan in front of you now will be highlighting what we plan to do in the period July through to September, but it will also highlight those areas for what we call Quarter 3 and Quarter 4 of this financial year, plus also Quarter 1 of the next financial year, of our indicative audits, basically, of those that we'd like to look at. And so we keep going back and refreshing each quarter what we've done. We have a look as well at what we've done in Quarter 1, for example, and how that's going. What you will find is that audits don't start in Quarter 1 and finish in Quarter 1. As much as we'd like them to, we've highlighted issues where it does take time. We need buy-in to the audit process. We get out there, we talk with officers, we start audits, and as long as they've bought into the process, we can get the audit moving, get the evidence coming in, do the testing, and that it's fine. But sometimes these things don't always happen according to plan, and there are delays. What we try to do is have each member of the audit staff will have 2 or 3 audits on the go at any one point in time, so they're not sitting around waiting for something to come in. And they will talk to the group auditors, and the group auditors will give them additional work from the plan where we can. So what we try to do is look at those areas we think need covering. Some you'll see we cover throughout the year. So it's not just a quick audit look. We'll do things over the period of a year to get to see how things are moving. Certainly things like the long-term waste management project that we've got in there, we've been doing that now for the last couple of years. That is an area that the Audit and Governance Committee asked us to look at, and we provide assurance back that the project is being run properly. There's other things in there as well that we sit on various boards and stuff like that, such as the Adult Social Care Transformation. Hannah, who's here today, she sits on that, and it adds. It's twofold. Hannah can then see what's going on with regard to the transformation adult social care and build that into future audits. You can also have an input into what's going on as well and get assurances as to how things are changing. And it all feeds back into our overall annual audit opinion. Things like we have a schools contingency for the schools financial value standards audit, and that runs throughout the year. We tend to we sample a number of the schools. We do self-assessments on all the schools, but actually go in and look at, say, a third of those each year, and that feeds through then for something for Alison as Section 151 officer for her annual summary, for Chester sign off an annual statement on the SFBS each year. Same with grant application, grants that the council has got as well. We do grant certification work as well, and that runs throughout the year. The big problem with that, of course, is that people don't tell us there's a grant coming, and then about a week before they'll say, this grant needs certifying by the head of internal audit and the chief exec, can you get it done for us, please? We'll try to, but we need more time on that. Just picking up on the Q2 ones, you can see that the key ones for us, we want to do some work around fire safety compliance. IR35 is an area as well that we've picked up on, that we need, are the processes actually working? So what we'll be doing there is looking at get assurance and give assurance to management that the processes they have in place are actually working. In communities in place, we want to have a look at the levelling up fund projects and also highways maintenance. In people services, we're doing a bit of work around appointeeships, particularly there because of the nature of that and the fact that there's still issues within the council where cash can be given out and transferred, shall we say, to these virtual accounts where the council has the appointeeship for various people in social care. Having a look at school attendance and management of school exclusions and things like that. And then there's going into the key areas around the council's assurance framework. There's an ongoing piece of work. The IT contingency, we have an IT auditor that goes out and looks at all the IT systems and comments on those. What we have learnt with that one is that rather than just do an audit report at the end of the audit, if there's any issues coming up because of the severity sometimes with, certainly around data breaches and that type of thing, we want to make sure that management know that these issues need dealing with quickly. So we'll do audit memos on those, saying these are areas that you need to be dealing quite quickly, and that's worked quite well. And surprise, surprise, we have a fraud contingency as well, because under the financial procedure rules, any fraud should be notified through to Alison as Section 151 officer, and he'll then contact us and myself. We have a counter fraud team as well that we work closely with, and we will look at how we can best tackle that. And going forward, we've identified a number of areas, as we said there. Again, not all of these will come to fruition, but they're there as areas, and we'll decide as to how we want to do them. We do look at the risk register in detail, and we do pick off the risk register. We also do our own audit needs risk assessment as well, which identifies areas we ought to look at. And then there are third-party requests as well we take into consideration. But overall, we try to have a breadth across all the directorates within the council. So what we don't want to do is just do audit work in one directorate, because I can't then give an opinion across the whole council. And at the end of the day, as I keep saying, all this work is so I can form an opinion that I can then bring in my next year's annual report to you. But that's all I want to say on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that. So, a couple of things just for clarity, my own understanding. The third-party requests, such as IR35 assessment, what's the likely source of these requests?
It can, third-party, that's just a general term. It can be members of the accountancy team, for example, who've come across issues. So it could be officers, it could be things we pick up from outside as well.
Thank you. And then again, just from my understanding, we've got reasons for audit and requirements for audit, but that don't seem to be linked to the risk register, or that the risk register isn't referenced on the report. Is that accurate, or is that something that needs to be looked at?
It's accurate. What it is, risk register is just one of the sources we look at. What we try to do there is we'll pick out certain risks and say, okay, this is a risk on there. The risk register will identify all the various controls to mitigate that risk, and what we'll do is we'll go out and test for those. Are those controls actually in place, and are they actually working? There are other areas as well. If we stuck solely to the risk register, it'd be very narrow focus, and to give an opinion on the governance, risk and control of the whole authority, I need a much wider one. So hence why we have our own audit needs assessment as well, which brings in our own risk assessment. Like, have we looked at this area in the last 5 years? No, we haven't. Perhaps we ought to.
Understood, thank you. And finally, it's an ambitious plan. I don't actually have insight into your resource, but I assume these are assigned statuses in terms of ambition.
Yeah, we've got an idea ourselves of what we can cover. So we put all these forward, and then each quarter we go back to have a look at, okay, which ones can we now move up onto this quarter's plan? So you'll see that some of these will remain on our indicative list, and we're falling backwards. But if we feel that there's a need, then we move them up. But we have got a limited resource. And as I say in the covering report, that with the new MTFP savings as well, the amount the council wishes to spend on internal audit has been reduced. So we've had to reduce the days that we've got. So we're about 200 days less than we would have had last year. So that's roughly anywhere between 10, 12 audits that we can't do this year because we've got a reduction in days that the council are willing to purchase from us.
Thank you. Looks like good work. Does anyone have any questions or observations on this report? Councillor Kerr?
Thank you. Yes, there's a lot there, isn't there? And I was going to actually mention 3 areas which just to consider whether or not they needed to be within that wider scope. One is homelessness, and the current housing market is making it really difficult for the council to achieve what it needs to do in terms of meeting homelessness needs, and the result is that we have a lot more people in bed and breakfast, which is additional cost to the council as well. So although it's a service that the council has moved over to Derby Homes, the council remains responsible for achieving the required outcomes under legislation. And I think it's worthy of a conversation with somebody from Derby Homes as to whether there is a role for internal audit to be looking at that. There is work going on already within Derby Homes to try and address that and see what other options and be more creative. But it is an area of pressure that might need watching. The second one is the changes that are going on at the moment within the high needs budget of education, which is an ongoing project. It sounds really positive, and it's whether or not it needs a little bit of, as there are new stages happening and new ways of working and a number of schools, additional schools getting involved, providing new services, whether there is an opportunity there to provide additional resource to make sure that that project goes well. And finally, and this is one that other members may have been contacted about, is whether or not, is much more light-hearted as well, is whether our grass cutting could be improved. There's been a reduction in budget this year. The grass is continuing to grow regardless of the budget cut, and therefore the grass is getting longer. And people are contacting me saying they think it's a matter of pride in the city that we should look after our grass and not make it something that's an issue in terms of our status as a city, and whether there is scope within that. That's something we need to just alert people to the possibility of doing a bit on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just unpack that a little bit? In terms of the grass cutting, I agree, and I equally have been contacted. But what role do you see audit and governance performing in order to provide some assurance on grass cutting?
I think it's up to them to scope it. But if management of that section is not being alert to the need to make changes, then somebody needs to make noises. I've made noises. It could be the cabinet member who makes noises. It could be internal audit who ask what they're doing because they understand it's got a number of pressures at the moment.
I think I understand. The challenge is having something to measure the performance against, a set of rules or something to be audited against. I'm not sure if I'm speaking on your behalf or out of turn.
I just think in terms of the grass cutting, the council made a decision when it set its budget to reduce the resource in that particular area. So I think is probably, and a consequence of reducing resource will be less grass cutting. I think from this audit's, from this committee's viewpoint, I think I'm struggling to, to see really the value in an internal audit around a service that has been, politically agreed to be reduced in order to balance the council's budget.
I think I'm with you on that. I mean, if there was a grass cutter's code of conduct to be audited against, I'd be fully in favour. But as things stand, I'll leave it with managers to consider the proposal. And on the Derby Homes and the schools, noble causes, let's ask the question, is there any scope or can that be taken into the horizon?
I'll just mention on the SEND one. The SEND one's already on the audit plan that's already been put forward. And just to give audit the committee some assurance on that SEND is that we also have a PMO, Project Management Office, that provides assurance on major projects. And we have quite a stringent gateway process that projects have to go through in order to progress. And the SEND issue is within the PMO scope, so that is also following that. So I think that's on the audit plan and is a major project of the council that runs through the PMO. In terms of homelessness, I don't know whether, yes, you're right, Lucy, there's been a big increase in terms of use of B&B. It's a financial concern. I'm not sure whether you've got a view, Richard, in terms of possible scope in that area.
A lot will depend down to, we'll need to analyse the risks around what's happening on that and see if what are the risks, has anyone identified those risks and how they're mitigating them. So there is scope. I mean, as part of the partnership, we also do Derby Homes as well, so we can have a look at both sides of things and see what is the issues here. Is there anything that's worth auditing? And again, it's something I'll sit down with the two group auditors and decide whether it's something we would put onto the plan. But again, if we do put it on the plan, it will come before you.
Thank you. So you're prepared to take that forward as an action?
We'll certainly have a look at them, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, worth auditing.
Yeah, Chair, that's all I think, just to have somebody on the expert side to consider whether or not it is something they should be looking at.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Wright.
Yeah, the first point is just an observation that I don't necessarily, not an answer for now, that it seems to me that I think there's 15 audits planned for this quarter, plus all the ongoing audits, plus the suggestions that have already been made in this. It seems to me a very heavy workload, and some of them it's a bit difficult because it's third party. I understand that one of them, it says it's come from this committee, has referred it to. So it's probably for the next or subsequent meetings in terms of that is a heavy workload, and we're talking about what the likely outcomes compared to the effort expended. That would be and prioritisation, that would be just an observation with no understanding in terms of what comes out of these reports. So that's probably further. I just, and Lucy's, Councillor Kerr's comment on grass cutting, I share those issues, but for me that's really to do with the who's in charge of that department to make sure it's done to the level. And for me, one of the performance indicators is feedback from residents, and I can supply lots of feedback from residents. In relation to resources, for me it's also not about resources, it's more about the quality of the work. And everybody appreciates with less resources less work needs to be done, but that shouldn't be at the impact of the quality of the resource. I think that's more of a communication issue in terms of residents understanding that there's less resources being put into this, but it's the feedback we've had is not on it's really about how it's been done, not in terms of how much it's been done.
Thanks, Councillor Wright. Yeah, one thing I'm particularly interested in that you've raised there is the return on investment in terms of people's time. It is a huge workload, I can see that, and we've already had some assurance about prioritisation, and that it's considered as part of each audit. Can you expand on the prioritisation process?
I can, Chair, yes. Myself, Hannah and Martin meet on a regular basis to discuss what audits there are going forward. I mean, we plan on about 1,200 audit days a year for this year, which is a lot. But we've got usually about 6 or 7 auditors working on the Derby audits, and if we want to keep them going, they need at least 2 audits a quarter, probably even 3 audits a quarter, so you can see where it comes. So, provided as I said earlier, provided that people are engaging with the audit process, then it's not a heavy workload. But what we try and do is, certainly Martin and Hannah will look at what we've got down here, and they prioritise based on their knowledge of the areas. Martin, for example, as he said in the induction thing, looks after the communities and place the directorate kind of looks after people. So they meet with directors from those areas on regular occasions, and so they've got an understanding of what the issues are. So they know where where the priorities need to be for our audit work and what benefits it will bring. And so the three of us sort of sit down and we look at that on a regular basis, and then it feeds through into the quarterly plan that comes through to you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, does that satisfy? Are there any other questions? Okay, in which case we move on to item 12 on the agenda, which to exclude the huge amount of press and public that have crammed the room this morning. Does that need to be formally moved?
Yeah, I'll just read it out. So it's to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items. That under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Councillors happy with that?
Members in favour? We under transmission there as well, do we? And once that's been achieved, we'll move on.